There's a place in Grand Teton National Park called the Elk Ranch. It is not to be confused with the Elk Refuge, which is in the south end of the park. This is in the north end of the park, about a half a mile from the Moran entrance. Not a lot of tourists get to visit the Elk Ranch because you need a four-wheel drive vehicle to cross the many creeks. Here's a glimpse of the Elk Ranch this winter. You can mostly see a little bit of sagebrush, hardly any snow, and a few willow bushes. About 2 miles back is a rock formation. This formation is what drew me to explore the Elk Ranch, and I found much more than just sagebrush. The rock formation is found on a section of the Elk Ranch called Ewell Hill. Its elevation is 7,313 feet. It's characterized by lots of sagebrush and other flora and fauna. The plants, animals, temperature, and precipitation lead me to believe that the Elk Ranch is part of the desert shrub steppe. Ranchers cultivated the fields surrounding you for cattle and horse grazing. The Elk Ranch, once located here, was the largest cattle ranch in Jackson Hole. Today you will still see cattle grazing on the Elk Ranch mixed in with the bison herd. The Park Service still has an obligation to meet to the people who have leftover grazing rates. Brucellosis is not a problem because only steers are allowed to graze here. Now I'm going to show you some of the fauna on the Elk Ranch. The primary consumers, or organisms that feed exclusively on green plants or the products, are the vole, the mountain bluebird, the Uinta ground squirrel, the yellow-bellied marmot, mule deer, pronghorn antelope, and elk. Here are some moose, which are also primary consumers. They are only found on the northern side where willow bushes grow along the creek. They are year-round. The bison are not hard to spot on the Elk Ranch. Here's a bison skull I found while I was hiking up Ewell Hill. Buffalo are also on the Elk Ranch year-round. This is what I believe to be a buffalo scrape. Now I'm going to show you some of the secondary consumers, or organisms that feed on animals that eat plants. We have the wandering garter snake, and the coyote that mostly feeds on mice and voles. Here's what I believe to be a coyote track near an animal hole. Here's the wolf on the Elk Ranch. The gray wolves used to have a den behind the Elk Ranch as of last year, but they abandoned the den and are more frequently seen eating on buffalo carcasses or wandering through. Grizzly bears are seldom seen except on the top of Ewell Hill on the north-facing slope, where coniferous trees are plentiful, unlike the bare south-facing slope. Mountain lions have also been seen along with its cubs. Tertiary consumers, or animals that eat primary producers. I have an example, which could be the hawk, or even other animals we've seen. Some can occupy more than one position on the consumer scale. Now we're going to look at some of the flora on the elk ranch, also known as primary producers or autotrophs. I was only able to identify a couple of the flora on the elk ranch. I found willow bushes, musk thistle, fescue grass, Indian rice grass, wheatgrass, and sagebrush. Bordering the edges of the elk ranch, you can also see coniferous trees such as spruce and deciduous aspen trees. Flora is interesting in the elk ranch in the way that naturally most of it would not be there if left to its own. The elk ranch is irrigated to make sure that the cattle have ample amounts of food. We have manipulated the environment and in return see many species that are not native to the area. It looks like a pretty prairie in the summer, but in all reality it would be covered in sagebrush. The irrigation ditches run through the middle of the elk ranch from a man-made reservoir on the east side, and it eventually meets up with the Snake River on the west side of the elk ranch.